Hello and welcome to Nerdarchy for Nerds by Nerds. I'm Nerds Dave, and today I'm joined by Jay Dragon from Possum Creek Games. How are you doing today?
Doing all right. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Um, before we jump in, and as always, folks, down in the description, you can find links to all the cool things Jay Dragon is doing and where to find them. You want to quick give us, who you are and what you do?
Yeah. So I'm Jay Dragon. I am a queer game designer in the Hudson Valley. I write games about community, mystery, liminality, monstrosity, all that kind of good intersection between the distressing and the heartfelt. And I publish them, and I run the publishing company Possum Creek Games. My big release was Wanderhome, but I'm also known for Sleepaway, The Flower Court, some other stuff besides. Hi.
Sweet. That's pretty awesome. You had a really successful Kickstarter with Wander Home, which is basically wandering animal folk, traveling animal folk is how you describe it. You actually have very interesting descriptions for the RPGs you've made. They're non-traditional, I would say, but evocative.
It's very intentional.
Yeah.
Yeah, I spend a lot of time agonizing over I think that one sentence, like making sure I get the right keywords and also the right concepts all in there and all that.
So,
Mhm.
what is Wander Home?
Wanderhome is a pastoral fantasy role-playing game about traveling animal folk moving through a world. I love Avery Alder's description of it, which is what if we just stuck with the first 20 pages or so of Redwall?
Mm.
It's that very it's about existing in a world that, as post-war, post-violence, there was war here, but there isn't any longer. And it's about a group of travelers who, for one reason or another, are navigating this sort of enormous world, trying to find a home, and also spending time with each other. It's very slice of lifey. It draws a lot on the works of like certainly like a lot of the illustrations of Redwall, and certainly like lots of little like concepts from it, but also from sort of the pastoral sort of daily lives of stories like Moomins, or some of the more like gentle Miyazaki movies like Kiki's Delivery Service, or certain chunks of House of Castle and such.
So what do you do in the game?
I always love that question. Wanderhome, the core of it is about journeying the journey. You build your character, and you create the place that you will be arriving in, and then you explore that place. You encounter the issues that place is dealing with. You make friends, you discover things, you see stuff, and eventually you move on. And the way the game kind of is, it's a little uninterested in like, all right, well, let's do a traditional story structure. It's much more interested in like taking spaces, entering those spaces, exploring them, like the way the world develops and deepens as you continue to play it, and kind of like discovering those things, and like moving these. It's kind of all these. That's kind of, I guess, the long and short of it is like it's about like playing it. I think a good way to describe what it's like to play it is that it feels very flowing. Like you kind of end up moving from like it's very much the feeling of like like exploring, inhabiting, moving through, appreciating. Like it's yeah, like there's sort of a lot of like discovery and deepening, kind of like creative world building that emerges from it. Yeah.
So we were talking a little bit before we got started, and
hmm
um, you didn't really start writing in tabletop RPGs. You're kind of like more
hmm
adjacent.
Yeah, I got started with live action roleplay stuff, with LARP stuff, as early as like when I was 12 years old. I think I started LARPing when I was 12. I wrote and ran my first LARP when I was 14 for I think around 70 people. We had a full production team. And it was just this whole endeavor, which, if you remember being 14, it's a lot to do as a 14-year-old, to coordinate and run and write. And so that was kind of my modus operandi for a long time. And then when I got older, I got into tabletop RPGs first through fourth edition D&D, and then through Monster Hearts, and then Apocalypse World, and I kind of ended up exploring that space. And I wrote a few RPGs. I kickstarted my first major one in 2019, and then I kickstarted Wanderhome last year. So that's kind of been my journey.
So, what was the first one you kickstarted?
The first one I considered was Sleepaway, which is a queer horror RPG about a group of summer camp counselors who are responsible for protecting their wards from a monster in this kind of like it's very much like almost like a modern magic or like a little magical realism inspired version of a summer camp world, and then with like with sort of monstrosity and this queer summer camp. And yeah.
So I'm kind of intrigued by the idea that you started LARPing when you were 12.
I mean, and it's funny because I when I say LARP, I think people often picture a very different thing than what I picture, which is like like for example, when I was 12, like my first LARP was it started at like 8 o'clock at night in late August. And I have this vivid memory of my first character being this like, like this poor little like, this poor ancient aging priest traveling through the woods. And I remember getting like horribly murdered by this monster in pitch darkness, like at 12 years old, getting just ripped apart on a hill, and then like having to like go through this whole spiritual reincarnation process, like in this pavilion that was like covered in candles and like full of like orange light, and like it was just it was a very weird experience. And that's kind of been my framework, is like it's like, all right, well, like yeah, LARP is like monsters and stuff, but it also like if it doesn't make you cry, is it good?
So how old were you when you started with tabletop RPGs?
I was 18 years old. I got started my freshman year of college. I took the year off, and I remember it was like I was very depressed. My friend was like, "Hey, come do our tabletop campaign," and I never managed to get a tabletop before, right? Like, I'm very ADD. I get distracted very easily. It was hard for me to like do the math, but my friend was like, "Don't worry, super easy. Like it's fourth edition, but I'll do all the numbers for you. You just come and play." And I was like, "Okay, sure." And I did it. And I was like, "Oh, this is really fun." And then I was like, "Oh, I want to learn more about this tabletop stuff." And I found out about Monster Hearts, and I was like, "This is fun." And then I like kind of I got really into it that way, and I ran a lot of D&D fifth edition. I ran a lot of like Apocalypse World, Monster Hearts, those kind of PBTA games, and then I kind of ended up and then after a while, like, you run those things for long enough and you start feeling like, oh wow, well if I did it, I could do it so much better. And hey, I'm already writing all these LARPs for teens, so I should just learn how to write one of these myself and do it. And I did, and then I went to a convention, and the rest was history.
So you've written a few RPGs already, and they're all kind of like drastically different. So do you think you're kind of more of a tinkerer, where like after Wandering Homes you'll make a new one, or a new game, or will you revisit the games you've already made?
I tend to revisit stuff a little bit. Like I wrote an expansion for Sleepaway. I have kind of like tentative plans for a second edition. Like I know what I would want to do if I do a second edition. And then like, but like also at the same time, it's like I need to write new stuff, right? Like I've got new projects. I have plans for what comes next after Wanderhome. I've got that path kind of laid out. I think it's just like I need to write. I just need to be writing. And if I feel like I return to things if there's more that I still want to say, and oftentimes I leave myself stuff that I want to say, but sometimes it's like you get to something and you're like, I just don't have more to say about this, or like I'm good. I've said my piece. I've given everything I can. Everything else is up to all of you.
I'm always intrigued when I meet different game designers because they seem to fall in like two categories, and that's
Mm-hmm.
like someone will make a game
Mm-hmm.
and then they're gonna develop and play with that game probably for the rest of their life, right? And then you meet
Mm-hmm.
other game
Mm-hmm.
designers that are more like tinkerers, and they want to
Mm-hmm.
like I want to do something with new mechanics. I want to make something different or something new or
Mm-hmm.
tell
Mm-hmm.
different stories.
Yeah, and I think I fall much under, I think much more under the latter category, just because it's like I do love to revisit stuff, but I can't imagine sticking with something forever. Like I feel like I just I like I feel like games to me always kind of feel like a proposal in a way to see the world. Like they're kind of like a pitch in a perspective you can take. And I can't. I feel like I'm a little too young and a little too. Uh, I second guess myself too much to ever be like to ever have a proposal on how the world is and say this is it, right? Like I write Wanderhome. Wanderhome is kind of a thesis on a way the world could be, but I can't imagine being like, and this is the way the I can't imagine the confidence of saying, and this is the space that I want to mess with forever, right? Because I'm wrong. I'm gonna be wrong, So I want to do something new.
Okay, what is wickedness?
Wickedness is so Possum Creek Games publishes games not just by me but also by other creators. We're kind of ramping into that right now. Wickedness is our other large project that we were involved in that isn't by me. I helped manage the Kickstarter, but it is by my friend M. And it's a game about a coven of three witches as they like evolve over the years. It's very much like about like three people kind of caught up in this dynamic with each other. It's very much like a montage game. Like you kind of like many years can pass by in the span of like a few, like within like a half hour. And it's about kind of like collaboratively like falling into this like developing this very deep relationship over a period of time, and then kind of like seeing where those witches end up over a decade.
So I ask a lot of people when they come on during the end times here. Do you find yourself gaming more or less or the same?
Um, I find myself gaming. I'd say. I'd say a little bit less, but like a little bit more in a weird way. Like I had like weekly groups and stuff before quarantine, and these days it's like I just don't have the energy for that kind of like weekly campaign commitment.
Yeah.
And so instead, what often happens is like, one of the games I'm playtesting is very modular, and like you can play in the span of like an hour. And so me and my friends will just we'll play a game for like an hour, 2 hours here and there. We're kind of like, and so I'm ending up doing a lot more game work, just like and playing it a lot more, just kind of like all over the place, I guess.
So is it more play testing?
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard for me to justify playing a game unless I'm playtesting it. Like
Yeah.
I don't have a lot of energy any particular day. And so like there are some games that I do find time to play. But and like I read a lot of games. Like I read every single game I can get my hands on, but I don't always play unless I can like really find time for it.
I can totally understand that. So
Mhm.
is most of your gaming, I mean, uh, probably pre end times, was it
Mhm.
in person or over
Mhm.
the internet?
It was mostly in person. I think that the tough thing with online play is I think that people are only just learning how to design games for online play. And I think that a lot of games suffer because there's a lot of things that are very intuitive in person that are oftentimes very difficult to express online. Like a lot of crunchier games benefit from being in person because like when there's no computers involved, it feels less like a computer game. But when
Yeah.
I sit down and like like, if I sit down and I play like a crunchy RPG online, I feel like I'm trying to simulate a computer game. Like I feel like I'm trying to play Among Us with just an Excel spreadsheet, which is kind of the worst way to play a computer game. And it's not like true, but I find myself like I think that it's going to take a little bit of time for people to get used to designing with the assumption that play is mainly online. And I think we're going to see a shift there. But I think I'm included in that too. I'm still wrapping my head around what it's like to play online instead of in person. But I think that we're going to see that shift at some point.
As a designer, do you have thoughts in that direction?
Yeah, I often do. There's been a few projects I've done that have been like, there's one game I released, The Flower Court, which was written like with online play in mind. Like I play tested predominantly online and did some real life play as like just to make sure that it holds up. But like the bulk of the play testing was online, and like was designed with that in mind. Like with it, like we built a Discord bot for it and everything. And I think that that's still how I like. I think like I'm kind of learning like, okay, what are like, if you're gonna play online, what strengths can the game have? Like what are the strengths of online? What are the weaknesses of online? How can I design a game with those strengths and weaknesses and still at the same time hold up in person is kind of the big trick. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure that out, but I'm getting closer, I think.
I know, I mean, not that it necessarily taps into it, but I know it was kind of interesting to see the first time that I saw an RPG book mention online play, which I believe was the Cipher System game from Monty Cook. Not that it intuitively adds anything from that space, but having played the game for a long time and finally seeing it acknowledged that we are now playing online, I found kind of interesting.
Yeah, and that's the thing also I tend to have to balance a lot. Like one of the tough things, right, with Wanderhome is written in a very diegetic style. Like it kind of like there's a very particular tone in the book of like, it uses like we a lot. It kind of is about like, it kind of gives the feeling of like, oh, this is like, it's kind of got a little bit of the tone of something that exists within its own world. And unsurprisingly, there's no computers in that world. And so trying to figure out like how to reflect on online play and make sure the game includes it without like explicitly mentioning it, because you don't want to like, I don't want to kind of pull people out, but at the same time it needs to be there. And like kind of is an interesting challenge. And I think I found it, but it was this like, I spent a while deliberating over like, should I mention, like, should I mention, like Roll20 or whatever? Should I mention, like that, character keeper programs in Wanderhome?
So you spent a lot of time like trying to figure out how to address
that. And I found out ultimately, I think the path I kind of ended up going with is there's a lot of references to like, like you'll need copies of these materials, like you'll need some kind of way to record this. And I kind of ended up phrasing, and then like within the examples of play, I mentioned that sort of stuff because the examples of play are, like people playing. And so I can like I made sure in the examples of play to include like, oh, and like here's here's kind of what it's like to play online. But that was kind of that particular challenge.
Yeah, I mean, because even like online play itself can mean vastly different things, right?
Yeah,
everything from it could be a full experience with sound and audio programs over across VTT with maps and effects and all that stuff to being just like what we're doing right here, just being over a video chat and talking, or a voiceover chat and talking.
One of my big beliefs as a designer is that there will always be more ways to play a game than I can conceptualize, right? That even if I think I can think of every single way there is to play a game, there will be people who come up with new ones, right? Where it's like, I can, and like that's the thing, that's why I think I chose not to mention stuff like, like certainly not Roll20, but like why I choose not to mention like a PDF in the text of the game. Because like maybe I mentioned that, and then I find out that some folks are playing Wanderhome with VR, or I find out they're playing it play by, there are people already playing it play by post, right? Where it's like, okay, well, like I can't proof for everything. I can't articulate every single way there is to play this game, because also like people play games in ways beyond that I can anticipate. Like there will be people who come up with ways to play games that I can't predict. So in that situation, I gotta, articulate it in different ways. I've got to find, I've got to like make sure that I'm leaving space for the fact that there'll be people who know how to have fun in ways I didn't anticipate.
So, from the chat, BK Dan wants to know, what is the crunchiest in-person RPG you've played?
Oh, fourth edition D&D. I actually miss fourth edition. I don't play it online, and I didn't even play it that much in person, but I think fourth edition D&D is a game that isn't good if you're looking for D&D, but is a really cool game just on its own. And I really like it as a way, I guess, it builds a really cool like framework to overlay other stuff throughout, like getting to kind of be like, all right, like we know that this is how, like fourth edition kind of does a lot on like, this is what combat looks like, like does a lot on what that looks like and very positional about it. But then it's like, well, the rest of it I don't care, and that's fun in an OSR way. I think like that's kind of fun in an old school way where it's like I don't have to, like I get to I remember in my first game of fourth edition I was like, oh no, I don't know how to get up this like wall, and my DM was like, oh well, you've got this chain ability, why don't you just use the chains to like Spider-Man your way up the wall? I was like, I can't do that, that's not in the rules. And my DM was like, the rules only cover combat, that's all they care about. Everything else is up to us. And I was like, that's a cool way of thinking about it. So I think my favorite, my crunchiest game is fourth edition as played with my friends. Not connected to the reality of any larger scene.
Yeah, I feel like Torg Eternity, and I did actually play it online, but it's kind of a terrible online game. Yeah. It's a fun game, right? But it's got like tokens, cards, dice. Like it's got a lot of doodads that I think work really well at a table. But maybe not so much online, and we had to like figure out how to make that stuff work.
Yeah, one of the tough parts I think of online is that online things take more time to manipulate. Like objects take more time to manipulate, including like writing stuff down on a sheet, and like moving tokens around certainly takes a lot of time to manipulate. And I think when designing, you've got to either like anticipate that, where it's like, all right, I know, right, like that there is a world in which you play Wanderhome just by doing character creation, and there's people who are like, oh, the character creation is good enough for me because it's like it's in because it's like it takes it like it can feel fulfilling on that front. But that's because like I knew that it would take more time online to kind of manipulate those elements, right? Where like something that can be very easily like filled out like on a piece of paper might take longer. And I think that part of design is being okay with that and working around it.
Where do you want to go next?
Well, my big project next is Yazeba's Bed and Breakfast, which we're hoping to kickstart September 15th is our kind of hopeful date down the line. It's a episodic legacy-based RPG about a magical bed and breakfast run by a heartless witch. It's very cute, slice of lifey, sweet. It's got some darker elements to it as well. We've done almost all the work for it and writing, and I'm very excited for it. We've got a wonderful team, and it's a beautiful game. And so that's kind of a lot of where my mind has been, and like a lot of what that involves is like, all right, well, you've got like, like a game. I don't know. There's like I've got all this like theory stuff, but then it's also just like, can I design a game that I can sit down and run for people in an hour? Like what can I design a game that has that like quickness to it? And like, can I do that online? Can I write a game that I can run for people in an hour online? Can I make a game that feels satisfying to play, even if you're only getting like a little snippet of it? And I think that's also, that's part of the quarantine, right? That's influenced by that. But beyond that, I don't know. Like I haven't put too much thought into beyond Yazeba's, just because I know that by the time I get to the publishing of that book, I will have some new idea. Grubby, my business partner Grubby, teases me because she jokes that every new project that Possum Creek does starts as like the thing I do at like 2 a.m. when I don't want to deal with the business end of it. Like I'm done looking at spreadsheets. I'm done dealing with taxes. I'm gonna, write an RPG. And I start
Yeah.
doing that and I hide it from her. And then by the time like I show it to her finally, I'm like, hey, so I've been working on this little thing on the side. She's like, oh cool, what is it? I'm like, here's 20,000 words. And she's like, you're awful.
So do you use the same mechanics, or do you change up the mechanics depending on what you're working on?
There's certain mechanics I tend to fall into. The belonging outside belonging engine is a really simple, reliable concept that I tend to fall back on. Not so much because it's like in any way better or like because I think that it has advantages other engines don't, but just because it's the language I know and
Mhm.
it's very easy for me to speak that way. But inevitably, right, like you kind of start with that with a very simple base and you end up expanding on it and developing on it. And so every single one of my games kind of ends up in a very bespoke spot, but it all kind of starts from the same, I guess, like design philosophy where I'm kind of always thinking about what it means to play a game in a similar way, and then like where that ends up with for the game is going to be different.
And what mechanics set did you say?
Belonging Outside Belonging, which is by Avery Alder and Ben Rosenbaum. It was released in. It's been worked on since like 2013, but it was first released with Dream Askew and Dream Apart, and then Wanderhome is kind of the most famous game that uses it, but the structure of it is no GM or like an optional GM, no dice. Instead, you use tokens to kind of determine the flow of the narrative. Setting elements and like the world kind of gets split up among people. Lots of pick lists, lots of choices that are all about like world building and kind of building community together. And those are kind of the elements that I tend to fall back on, where it's like I don't tend to use dice in my designs. I tend to have lots of lists with options you can choose from. I tend to like be about creating very resonant concepts that can then kind of like be passed around pretty easily. I tend to be focused on like new player accessible and like making sure the game is easy for someone who's never played an RPG before to pick up. Those are kind of my priorities with design. And so those things kind of show up everywhere, even if I'm not intentionally looking that way.
Okay, I'm actually not familiar with that style of play. I've
Mm-hmm.
never tried it before.
It's
Uh,
fun. It's fun. It kind of falls into the same reverse bell curve that can sometimes happen where um it can be a bit of a culture shock sometimes, but like especially if you're used to like if you've been playing D&D for like 20 years, it can feel a little culture shocky.
yeah.
And that's why like oftentimes like BOB games, like PBTA games, like kind of those indie games, they tend to be very easy for people who are very new to games or very like experienced with a variety of games. And but I still like it as a model just because it is even if it's a little culture shocky, it's still easy to explain at least. It's very easy to get you on the ground floor of it. And it's fun. It's just it requires a little bit of a it doesn't it's a little different than what you might be used to, but I think it's really I enjoy it personally.
It kind of has like a party game quality feel to me.
Mm-hmm,
Um,
mm-hmm,
that you might that you might play where you go around with a group. I'm definitely interested in checking it out. I just haven't gotten
mm-hmm.
around to it yet. Uh,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um,
you
I
mentioned using
mhm.
tokens in it. So like,
Mhm.
where is it like resource management or?
It's a very simple token economy. The core kind of idea of belonging outside belonging is as in Dream Askew and Dream Apart, it looks like where you have weak moves, which are things that your character does that sets them back in some way that is like it's equivalent of rolling a miss, right? Like
Mhm.
missing a roll, like the failure of some kind, or like kind of maybe a moment of emotional failure, or like something like that. And that gets you a token, and then you can spend those tokens on strong moves, which is when your character is kind of at their height, at their peak, kind of able to solve something with ease. And so the idea there is that the tokens kind of become like a rhythm to the game,
Mhm.
where weak moves create complications, which are then resolved with strong moves. There are other ways to get tokens often, and those kind of all end up feeding together, such that the rhythm becomes about that, like, making tough choices, incurring failure, and then using that as a basis to succeed later.
Monster of the Week uses kind of like similar language to that.
Yeah, it's BOB is built off of it's built off of that PBTA structure of Monster of the Week, of Monster Hearts, of Apocalypse World,
Yeah.
Of even Blades in the Dark is kind of using similar language. They're all kind of from the same family, I guess. Like it's Vincent Baker, Vincent and Meg Baker proposed a philosophy on what games were like, and then for the next decade, everyone's just thinking about it and writing games that are kind of in that space. And my games kind of end up sometimes just as much disagreeing with Vincent and Meg as they do agreeing, but it's kind of all still there.
Well, that's kind of like the point as a designer, right? We get to put our interpretation on things and our vision out into the world.
Yeah, and like I think what I love about design is that in the end, it's always very everything exists in conversation, right? Where it's like my designs exist in conversation with everyone else's designs, but also, in player feedback and the way people play and the way I play and the world around me. And then at the end of the day, when I design a game, that's only really half a game, because I write this text and then you take it and you play it, and you're bringing all your stuff into it. And what you're left with at the end of the day is whatever you end up playing is something that is wholly new. And so that's why I like designing games, is because like, the stuff, like it becomes this conversation of where all of us have been and what all of us have done and what all of us bring to the table. And the book gets to be a part of that as well.
Have you had any, or what is the biggest like surprising like story or feedback in ways people have used your games that maybe you never anticipated?
I think my favorite moments have been I think the two that have brought me the most joy have both come from Sleepaway, which is there was a TikTok meme for a bit about Sleepaway, where Sleepaway has all these like genders, and it's kind of like very unique approach to gender. And there's a TikTok meme of people using those genders to like or describe themselves, and so that felt awesome. That felt really exciting to see. As a Zoomer, it felt really cool. And I think the other part of it was there's a bunch of entries on there's a bunch of fanfic about Sleepaway. There's a bunch of archive of our own fanfic where people would, instead of playing Sleepaway normally, there was at least one group, I think maybe 2 or 3 groups, who took the rules of Sleepaway and used that as kind of the framework to write a series of fanfic. And I think that's awesome. I think that's the coolest thing on earth. And that's kind of what I meant when I said earlier, right, that there's always more ways of playing than a designer can anticipate, which is that I didn't in a million years expect someone to take my game and to use it as a basis to tell fanfic or to make art or to, like do a TikTok meme that helps them figure out that they're non-binary. Those are all kind of moments that I could not have anticipated as a designer, and yet is play, and they're engaging with the game as play, and they're playing it, and they're getting something from it that I couldn't have expected. So that's, I think, the most exciting moments for me, and the most unexpected that I'm always very thrilled by.
Yeah, I mean, I love seeing other people's interpretation of stuff that we've done. A matter of fact, some of the products we put out are like that, where me and Ted will do a video and discuss a topic and then hand it to a writer. Be like, here, what is your game interpretation of this thing we just did? And then seeing what they come back with.
There's something incredibly thrilling about letting other. I never understand writers who conceptualize it as this like lonely heartache, this like I am alone in this world. Because for me, I feel like writing is this like insanely collaborative process where it's like, like for Wanderhome, right? There's like me, and there's like my business partner, and there's like our artists and our stretch goal writers and our editors and our playtesters and our friends who I bounce ideas off of, and there's my Twitter followers to, like, engage with things, and there's, people who play the game, like on stream and stuff. And that, because the game isn't quite out yet, that means it kind of feeds a little bit back into design, right? Where like I see someone play, like a character, and I'm like, oh, I love that. Or like I saw on stream one time someone interpret a prompt in a specific way, and I was like, oh, that's great, that should be part of the game. Why is that not just part of the game? Like I think they like maybe technically misinterpreted it, but I was like, no, that's perfect, I want that actually should be in the game. And so it's like, yeah, like I feel like writing is this like incredible, enormous collaboration. And yeah, that's my big feeling.
What advice do you have to someone that wants to become a game designer or writer?
Good question. There's the very, I think, doofy answer, which is to write. That there's never going to be a moment when you become one until suddenly and abruptly there is, right? Like, you can't call yourself aspiring because you just have to do it. And I think my biggest piece of advice right now, like I think I always have a different answer. But I think my big piece of advice right now is write things, and write small things often, and be fine if they're bad. And if you have an idea for some genius thing that you think would be really cool, write it and be okay if it's bad, right? Because your first thing might not be good, but that's okay because you can write it again, right? Like that shows up in visual art all the time, where like visual artists return to the same motifs over and over and over again, right? Like they will, they'll, like you look at, I used to study art history, and you look at some of these Renaissance painters, and there was this one guy whose name I have forgotten because it's been a hot second since I've been in class, but he painted the Madonna with Child something like 24 times. He just kept coming back. And over the course of his life, and there's actually work that's been done to study the relationship between the Madonna and Child as he depicted it, how it changed with his life, and what that can maybe say about him as a person and his growth, like, and his relationship with his mother, right, and his relationship with the world. And he kept revisiting it. So it's okay to write something and have the first thing you write be bad. You'll come back to it and just write. The important part is to write over and over and over again, and just make things and put them out in the world. And if they're not good enough, just do it again later when you want to again.
Now, all I can think about is being that person and having your life analyzed so deeply over the different stages of where it was when you painted this painting.
I know. I'm like, oh my god, I cannot imagine the terror of being an art historian, or sorry, being the subject of art history, and knowing, like hundreds of years from now, how closely people look at your life.
Yeah. So, how into the convention scene were you before the end times?
I was a little into it. I wasn't like a regular. I tend to struggle to like get out there like frequently, but I went to a couple. I've been to a few. Like I knew folks in the convention scene. Like that's where like I've got some good memories. I miss it certainly. My favorite was Big Bad Con, but like I'd also kind of hit up the Northeast circuit. DexCon, the double exposure stuff. But yeah. I'd never been to GenCon. I was going to go to GenCon last year. That was going to be my first GenCon appearance. But
when things open back up, what's the first one you want to go to?
Oh, Big Bad Con. Big Bad Con. I don't know. It's a little of a smaller con. It's on the West Coast, but going there feels like a who's who in design. Like I remember going there, and the first time I went. Right, like I'm still new to RPGs. A lot of these folks have since become my friends, and I view them as my friends. But in that moment when I first show up, and I see like all these huge names of like, oh my god, there's the person who wrote Blades in the Dark, and there's the person who, there's Avery Alder, and there's, the Bakers, and that's Orion Black, and oh my God, there's, just like everyone, and everyone's everyone. And I was just like, oh no. I felt like I felt so starstruck, and I felt so silly. And I want to go back to that, because I want to go back, and I want to be able to feel like I'm actually a person and not just like a kid in a candy store.
But you know what?
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't be too dismissive of that, like, because you only get to be that way for so long, right?
That's true. Yeah. Now I know these people, for better or worse.
Yeah, but I mean, it's also cool. Like, I like conventions because, having done this for a while now, I've met so many people online, and it's like when we would get to kind of come together and meet up.
And get to like actually put, faces to names, and also just get to like chat with folks. Like, I still remember, like one of my dear friends, Kazumi, who's the editor for Wanderhome. I talked to them a lot online, and then I met them at Big Bad Con, and realizing like, oh, this is what you're like in person. Suddenly, like, all these conversations we've had make more sense, because I understand like what
they're a real person now.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I know what your voice is like. I understand like when you like talk this way. I know what you mean by that. I was like, oh my God, suddenly it all clicked together.
I haven't been to Big Bad Con yet. I'll have to check that out. Most of the cons I've been to have been in the Midwest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't have a ton of like flying out budget, certainly. So like Big Bad Con was my like one splurge of 2019. Like I want to go to GenCon. I know GenCon will overwhelm me, but I want to go there.
It is overwhelming.
I've been there. Yeah,
GenCon and Origins, they're like cities.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to be there, even though I know like I get overwhelmed very easily, so I know I'll go there and just like hide out in my hotel room, but I still want to be able to say I went,
Yeah. PAX Unplugged's a good one, and that one's
I was gonna go to that one. I was actually gonna go to that one. I was planning on going to that one and to Gen Con in 2020, and then again things happened. But
the apocalypse.
Exactly. Yeah,
worst apocalypse ever.
I know. God.
Yeah. So we usually hit PAX Unplugged only because like we're just outside of Philadelphia, and that's in Philadelphia. So we feel morally obligated to attend.
That makes sense. That's why I tend to hit up a lot of the double exposure stuff, because it's in New Jersey, and like that's just right down
up in North Jersey.
So it's easy so it's easy for me to just hop on over and do all that stuff.
I know I have a bunch of friends that usually hit those, and I've been saying for years we need to hit those, and we just haven't got to it.
I really love I haven't. The one I want to go to most is I've been to. I really like Dreamation. DexCon is a little too big and a little too scattered for me, and like even Dreamation feels a little too scattered sometimes. But I really want to go to Metatopia. That's the one that I think I've had the most fun at. I've enjoyed the most, because Metatopia is focused on playtesting, and so it's like you go there and you've got all all these designers are there, and they're all trying out their new games. I think that's a cool experience.
Yeah, we've got a few friends in the tabletop game space that are designers, and they usually hit those three. They're on the list.
They're on the list.
Yeah.
I know my list has gotten so much longer now.
So we were supposed to actually throw our first convention in 2020, just outside of Philadelphia in Oaks, PA. But the end of the world happened.
For sure. Things got different. Yeah, absolutely.
We wrote, Story of My Life. I wrote a huge check for a deposit for the convention center like 2 weeks before everything shut down.
Oh no, I'm so sorry. Oh my God.
Yeah. So I was like, oh yeah. So we postponed it to this year, but it's still up in the air as to what we're doing.
A lot of folks are getting vaccinated, but like not everyone. Yeah, it's a whole thing. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the hardest thing too is like, well, if we're doing it this year, you have to be planning like almost a year in advance, and with everything being so up in the air. I'm actually scheduled to get vaccinated today, or the first shot.
Congrats! Yeah, I'm scheduled for Wednesday. Which
congrats! Yeah, my wife got her first one last week, and I get mine today, and then I guess in
Congrats. Yeah. Holy
I,
shit. Yeah. Here we go.
like what is it? I guess you got to wait like 2 weeks afterwards, and then you're like kind of good. I mean, you
Yeah.
can still
Yeah.
be a plague rat, but you yourself are
Yeah. Yeah. But
good.
yeah, I can always be a plague rat. I'll be a plague rat at my own time. Damn
Yeah,
it.
yeah. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
so we're getting
Absolutely.
closer. I feel like the end of this year, things will be getting
I think
starting to
things.
get
I think
back to
things will be
normal.
different. Yeah. I mean, that's what I'm hopeful for. Like, I really. I mean, like, it's funny with Uzebas, which kind of, I started working on Uzebas before quarantine. I started working on it in like November 2019, and so like in a lot of ways, it's kind of been this like quarantine project, like
Yeah.
this kind of like like I keep and like really what I'm looking forward to is that like once all this is over, I want to be able to actually sit down and play it with my co-writer. Like I want to be able to play it in person and feel what it's like, because it's been so much like online work and testing it out online, but it's like I want to like I'm looking forward to when I can actually sit down and feel it in front of me and know it's real.
Has the quarantine experience changed any of your thoughts on design?
Yeah, yeah, I would say so. I'd say a fair few. I think the big one that I've come to really appreciate. I mean, beyond the stuff I kind of mentioned earlier about everyone about there being more ways to play than a designer can anticipate, which has kind of been my big quarantine feeling. I think also my other kind of big moment has been I don't know, just like there was a period of like 6 months in there where I was just like very isolated. Like I have roommates now, but there was like a chunk where it was like I was just alone.
Yeah.
And that made me really, I think, appreciate I don't know, appreciate the ways like I don't, like, appreciate a lot of design choices. Like there was kind of a lot of stuff I learned in there, and I learned how to think about games in there, I think, just from being very not really connected to anyone else, and kind of like, like I'd be talking online, but like time felt different, certainly. And I just kind of like, I kind of feel like doing that meant that I learned, I think maybe most importantly, just like, uh, how to, I'm trying to think, what's the right way to put it? Um, how to use like I think how to use games to feel less alone, but then also I think how to use like how games can be aspirational, like
Okay.
beyond just what it means to play a game in the moment, what it means to look at a game and imagine playing it.
I know we definitely, I have like one group that formed around the idea of we're all in quarantine. We're not going to be doing anything. So we might as
Mm-hmm.
well add this other game to it. But then like
Yeah.
everyone got like super busy
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
in some ways we're lucky that we're in a kind of a industry
Mm-hmm.
that is able to kind of thrive despite us not
Yeah.
being able to be in
Mm-hmm.
person together.
Yeah, I'm really grateful. I am. It's been so surprising how in a lot of ways this quarantine has been more successful for me business wise than like it would have been, I think, without the quarantine. For better or worse. Which is just such a weird feeling,
Lock
but
people up and make them play your games.
yeah, exactly, exactly. Like, hey, like, and look, when you're writing a game that's about like looking forward to the day when you can travel with your friends, right? Like,
Oh
like
yeah, yeah.
writing a game that's about, and also Wanderhome is set in it's set in a world that I was very specific with the language in the text, but there is no violence here anymore. Wanderhome's a non-violent game, but it's very explicit that that is not always how the world has been. That is something new, and that gives kind of the whole game a feeling of yearning. I think almost like imagining, like, well, why can't this be where I'm at now? Like, why it's kind of like desire of like I want to be here now and not where I am. And I think that kind of works well in quarantine when we're all yearning.
Yeah, it sounds like a
Yeah.
great game for escaping what everyone's going through now
Yeah,
and what
exactly.
everyone's feeling.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly, exactly.
for sure.
Hmm.
So that's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
When does Wander Home deliver?
Wanderhome, the PDF should be coming out next month, and the game should be coming out pretty shortly after that. We don't have a locked in stone deadline because we don't like a lot of that depends on like kind of the graphic design work and getting the PDF together. But certainly by the end of May, we should have physical books in people's hands. Is
Oh,
the hope?
nice.
Mm-hmm.
And when was it? When would the Kickstarter wrap up?
Wrapped up at the end of August, or like end of August, start of September.
So that was a pretty fast turnaround.
Yeah, all things good. Well, the text is done, so at that point, it's just
Yeah.
like text is done. A lot of the art is done. At that point, it's just getting it all together in one place and getting it into a book and printing it out.
So, so who handled the art direction? Did you handle
My
yourself?
business partner, Grubby. She's funny because she doesn't care about RPGs at all. She doesn't at all. She doesn't. Like we met through our work with LARPs, but she doesn't care about like tabletop games. She plays like one game of Dialect a year. But for
Yeah.
her, she's a graphic designer. She's a book. She's a layout artist. She does work with like formatting and all of that. Like that's and like she studied fine art in college, and like that's kind of where her focus is. And so for her, she really cares about RPGs as like the books we make as art and like about them as like objects that look beautiful and like convey meaning well. So when we talk about like art direction and layout for Wanderhome or for any of our other projects, she's kind of doing a lot of that with an eye for like she's not looking at other RPGs, she's looking at like what's coming out in traditional publishing right now, what's coming out in the art scene, what's coming out like in that world, what can she be learning from there. And so it adds a really unique flavor to a lot of the work that she does and a lot of the art that we use.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Because I did the art directing for our stuff, and I am not an artist of any shape or form, and I can't wait to someday have that task handed off to somebody else.
I feel you. I'm so grateful to have her on board because it's like I know a bit. Like I said, my art history like spiel earlier, but she's really got an eye for it, and it's funny because for Yazeba's is the first project I've done where we have a dedicated concept artist, right? Like a separate from the illustrators. We have, like art direction kind of from the ground up, like kind of very built into the work of the game. And it really feels different. It really like, for the first time, I feel like I'm not just me in my room writing something. Like it really is special to have a dedicated concept art person and dedicated, like art direction, kind of on that level. That rules.
What do you attribute the success between Sleepaway and Wanderhome? Because they were both successful, but Wanderhome was much more successful.
Yes, Sleepaway was very successful for a first project. Like at the moment, I was like, "This is incredible," and then Wanderhome kind of broke my brain open.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a big part of it is I think that Sleepaway, it was the first project. We were intentionally very conservative with it. Like we weren't going to do a large print run. We weren't going to do any doodads or extras. We were just literally like, we are trying to get this book out just to like learn what it's like to do a Kickstarter and like get the feel for it. And then with Wanderhome, it was like, all right, well, we've learned a bit more. We can do some stuff. And I think we, at that point, I had some more folks I could tap in, like, like ask for help with. We were able to offer like more merchandise. We kind of had learned a bit more. And I think also Wanderhome just kind of hit the cultural zeitgeist at just the right time in the right way, where it's like the Kickstarter launched, in the middle of the summer, where it's like everyone wants nothing more than to get to sit down with their friends. And like, I think it kind of was very like, it's kind of able to be a promise of like, hey, like we're going to make it through this and this is what it's going to be like. And that's really cool. And I think that really excited people because I think like I remember even filming the video for Wanderhome, the promotional video was the first time I'd like actually spent a while around folks in like a month. Like it was like there was something about like even just filming it where it was like, hey, like we're getting to spend time together. And I think that it was that kind of that kind of yearning. I think that kind of idea that things are gonna get better that really hit different for folks.
What lessons from Wanderhome were you taking forward with you into the next one?
I think the biggest lesson I've learned from Wanderhome is that you it's better to that you don't want a huge team. You want a small team who you can pay a lot to do a lot of good work, but more people doesn't necessarily mean a more successful product. It just means more W-9s and more, like more paperwork.
Yeah. So maybe more focused.
Yeah, more of that focus. Because Wanderhome, part of Wanderhome was like, oh, let's have a bunch of different artists in here, which was a cool goal. But I think also it meant that I think that having like a lot of different artists means that they don't get to spend as much time. Whereas like my favorite art from Wanderhome is from the artists who got to do like 3 separate pieces in the same book. Like by the time they're doing the 3rd piece, they've gotten it and they're doing outstanding work. So that's kind of one thing I learned. I think the other thing is just I think it's kind of learning what scope. I don't know. Like, I feel like Wanderhome had a good scope. I feel like it's just kind of like learning and refining and kind of bringing those lessons, and I think understanding like this is what we're trying to do and really having a good solid like eye on it from the ground up, going in from a fair bit away.
Now, I will say the advantage of having a lot of artists is getting the art done faster.
Yes, that certainly helps. That was one of the nice parts about Wanderhome is we got like, we got all the art done by like November. Like we had a couple pieces trickling in towards the end, but all the art for the book, and like we're talking like I think 30 paintings, like full on, like in some cases traditional media, like watercolor and stuff. We got all those in like in a couple months, and that's really cool. But it also is like, I think it's about calculations, right? Where it's like I don't think we could have done that if we only had one artist doing all those paintings. That would be too much. But like, we get to have like a bunch of like I think for my next project, the nice thing about having a concept artist and having like like we can have like a couple different interior illustrators, they'll all be united by the concept artist's vision. And so having those kind of like that core team that can delegate, I think delegation is maybe the biggest lesson, is like I don't got to do it all by myself. I need to not think about it as like me organizing this like vast array, and much more like I need to think about it as like me coordinating, like I need to like build my team, and then my team gets to take on like extensions.
We did a book of 55 encounters with a piece of art and a map for each one, and we had one cartographer and one artist, which they did amazing work. Yeah. But it was just like, it's 110 plus whatever extra doodads and stuff. Holy shit. So it ends up being like a lot of work for those people.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a full-time job. And like with our concept artist, even like we're basically taking our concept artist on full-time for like not full-time, like part-time for the next 6 months. Like we're like, hey, we're paying you a monthly salary.
Yeah.
With this goal, because we know it'll take 6 months before you've got the large chunk of the work you're doing for your Zaba's all set. So, let's just dedicate that.
Which is awesome. Mm-hmm. Well, we are up on the hour mark. Final thoughts before we head on out?
It's been wonderful talking to you. It's been a delight. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thanks for coming on, J Dragon. I appreciate your time with me today. It's been fun chatting. And until next time, everyone, stay nerdy.
Take care, everyone. Take care. Bye.